This is Joel Garbon.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you to each one of you who've showed up. It's always the start of doing something great, isn't it? Just showing up, and then the rest comes very naturally. So I'm going to tell you a story that has a lot to do with various people just showing up to what they're called to do. First, I'd like to give you a little bit of background or a backdrop for what I'm going to present to you. If you think about technology in some very familiar fields of science, think of telecommunications. Think how far we've come since the 1960s in a rotary dial phone to where we are right now, and each one of you probably has a smartphone on your person. Think about the exponential advancement in telecommunications technology over those few decades. Think about computing. When I was in college in the early 80s, it was punch cards, all right? And so think about where we are right now. We have, I mean, if NASA had in the 60s what each of us have on our tablet, you know, or PC, it's amazing what they would have thought of that. It would have been like something that had come from E.T. But again, exponential advancement in technology. Think about medical imaging technology. Difference from 1960s x-rays to today's diagnostics, where you can pretty much see slice by slice every aspect of your physiology. Exponential. Now think about military aerospace technology. Think about the public space program, NASA. All right, what do we see there? Well, in the case of NASA, in the 1960s, we're launching rockets fueled by chemical propellants. Where are we right now? We are launching rockets fueled by chemical propellants. Think in 1991, Operation Desert Storm. First time the world had disclosed to it stealth aircraft technology. And think about what happened 1 year later. Our military was flying stealth aircraft around these fairs that the public could attend. Anyone could see a stealth bomber or stealth fighter flying overhead. It was amazing. Wow, stealth technology. Now, if you would accept that there's probably at least 10 years of advanced technology in the military development pipeline before the public ever becomes aware of it, at least 10 years, maybe more. And you go back to 1991, Desert Storm, and you come forward to now, we're about 25 years later, plus a 10-year pipeline that we're not aware of, that would suggest that there's at least 35 years of military aerospace technology in advance of stealth. Now, that implies light speed or beyond. Yet, we continue to be paraded around, well, no, these things, all of these military aerospace vehicles are being powered by the combustion of fossil fuels, jet fuel, things like that. Well, it's not the case. Let's think about energy now. Where are we here? 2016, what are we primarily using to generate electricity on this planet? Coal. Nothing's really changed much. But again, you'd think in something that's so fundamental to human civilization and the powering of our whole economy, energy, why aren't we on that same exponential curve? It's a good question. And I would suggest it's by design. Well, I'm going to tell you a story here. And that is going back to 2003. There were invitations sent out to a small group of people that came from a wide variety of backgrounds. There was an astrophysicist, an investigative journalist, a teacher, a scientist. There was an organic farmer, a political activist, an ecologist, and an industrial consultant. All these people came together to talk about a really cool idea. And that invitation had been extended by the astrophysicist, and his name was Brian O'Leary. Now, Brian had a very, very colorful background. He was in the Apollo program and trained as an astronaut. And Brian had the ability to go and investigate these kind of claims and whispers of various breakthrough energy technologies that were popping up around the world. And he went and investigated some of those, became convinced they were real, and he founded several technical organizations that had as their aim to advance the technologies and to try to bring resources to it and move it forward. But what he found was that it really wasn't happening. It was staying confined. All the information was staying confined in these technical circles. So what his idea was, in inviting this group of people from various backgrounds, was to plant the idea of taking that information out to the grassroots, out to the public at large, break it out of these little closeted technical communities. Let's go to the people. So those folks who were at that meeting, including some young and old activists, including 2 World War II veterans that you see here that were flanking a young colleague of mine, they were part of us launching something that we call New Energy Movement. And New Energy Movement is it's a nonprofit organization, and it is what I consider a real backbone to so much of what's going on in trying to educate the public and to provide advocacy for the inventors of breakthrough energy technologies. Now, what interestingly came about 5 years ago, New Energy Movement's going back to 2003, but just about 5 years ago, I was contacted by these wonderful guys from the Netherlands, and their names were Jeroen and Robert. And they said, hey, we want to do what you're doing. And are you okay with us essentially starting New Energy Movement in Europe, but we'd like to call it Breakthrough Energy Movement? And I'm like, it's about time. Where have you been? This is what we want. We want all of this information, anything we're doing. We want this to be replicated all over the planet. So absolutely yes. And any asset we have, any information, duplicate it, get it out there, whatever. And they go, well, what we want to do is we want to focus on having conferences. And so they've been doing exactly that. So if any of you have ever been to a breakthrough energy conference, or you might have heard of the Secret Space Program conference, amazing stuff. Those are put on by our wonderful colleagues from the Netherlands under the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement. So it's been very cool to have those guys rise up. So New Energy Movement, our major priority is to educate the public, the policymakers, and investment community about the need for serious and urgent support of breakthrough energy technologies in all its forms. And these are things that are coming out of the labs and workspaces of scientists and inventors all around the world. One of the mottos we have is that it is in how human civilization generates and utilizes energy that really is the most highly leveraged point for us to help solve these complex problems on our planet, especially the physical problems. And there's a laundry list of physical problems that we have. But tomorrow I'm going to be talking about things that go beyond the physical. They touch more on what Danny was talking about earlier and what Kimberly was talking about, things that really can't be measured so easily in terms of technology and science, but are equally as important, in fact, form the foundation of doing this right, doing this with integrity, and doing this with the power to tap into the power of the minds of a planet. So, does this matter? Why should we even care? I mean, is it true that our planet is really at stake? It's something that we all need to consider. And if you can look at the laundry list of things that we're all familiar with, whether it's the climate change issues that Danny pointed out so poignantly in his presentation, whether it's the pollution and despoiling of the biosphere, habitat destruction in all its forms, both on land and in the marine environment, the decline of our companion species, both in the air, on the land, in the water. I mean, there's so many things that are going on, and then the human things that as a society we're dealing with here is the resource allocation, the unfair distribution, the wars, the dislocations, all of these things. I mean, there's just such a number of pressing global problems that it would be reasonable for people to say, I can't take it. I'm putting my head in the sand and I'm going to watch Dancing with the Stars. You know, or you pick your distraction. Football, you know, whatever. It's very reasonable, and it's quite, well, I do it too at times anyway. So, you know, but the call is out there for everyone to realize we all have a stake in the outcome. Our children, our grandchildren, we all have a role to play in this. Because if we don't want to deal with it, we all know what the likelihood of the outcome is going to be. Not very happy. So the ticking time bomb can be extinguished. I am here to have a chance to give an optimistic picture. All right? No more fear porn. All right? So if you want just bad news, not me. So there are some good solutions coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology. And first thing is that, hey, there's been all kinds of amazing inventions that have been going back, you know, well over a century. I'm not going to go through all of this list, but other than to say there's a wide variety, a real diversity of approaches to having clean, renewable, high power density energy. Very exciting stuff. And a lot of the inventors behind some of these things are legendary, not only because of what their gifts were, like Nikola Tesla, but also because of in some cases, the heavy-handed suppression that was arrayed against them and blocked them from having something that came out into the public domain and had a planetary benefit. Whole nother page. Tons of these things. Look at it, all different kinds of different things. And I'm going to touch on a few of these in a couple minutes here. Because there are certain things where I think we have a real high probability of some of these technologies coming out in fairly short order. But if you're someone who looks and says, okay, well, what's the deal with renewable energy that the media is reporting on? And you see the same words each time. Wind and solar, wind and solar, wind and solar. And by the way, did you hear about wind and solar? And isn't wind and solar just a great thing? And you would think that it was the only thing. And what we've been trying to do at New Energy Movement and Breakthrough Energy Movement is to widen the conversation. Make sure people know that there's all kinds of things that not only are real, but should be so highly supported because the power density and the potential is just enormous. And it can really trigger a total revolution. In fact, a new energy era is how I like to call it. And it's there for us to grasp. So wind and solar tend to be the only thing that's discussed, despite the fact that those approaches are very low power density. What do I mean by power density? It means how much power are you getting from the footprint that's required for that device. So if you have a solar panel, all right, let's say, you know, it's about as big as a tabletop, let's say, and the amount of power that comes from that would be considered a fairly low power density compared to, let's say you had a device that was the size of your smartphone and produced the same amount of power as that big solar panel. That would be a relatively high power density technology. And all the things that I'm going to talk about today are much higher power density. The other thing we know with wind and solar is the intermittency, because they're relying on natural processes. You know, you have to have some sun, right? Or you have to have some wind. Well, what happens when you don't have those? Well, you got to make sure you got storage of some sort or have backup power like, well, burning coal or burning natural gas or keeping the nuclear power plant going and all those things there. So the intermittency is a disadvantage. Also, the resource intensiveness for these, not only from the fact that if you have a larger device for the same amount of power, that means that you have to mine more materials out of the ground, you have to transport more materials, which requires more fossil fuel to move that around and blah, blah, blah. And then the amount of land that you are using becomes a resource as well. Well, some people think it's great to have solar farms, but is it great to pave over a desert with solar farms? Well, that may not be a real keen idea to all the species that live in that ecosystem, as well as, a lot of the organisms that are above that space, like birds and bats and things like that, that in some cases don't really like when all of a sudden, a 1,000 degree beam of intense thermal energy touches their feathers. Not a good outcome, unless you like fast roast crow. And damage to the ecosystems themselves. And, I live in Portland, Oregon, pretty much downwind of the Columbia Gorge, and there's tons of giant wind turbines up there. And in talking to a number of the people who live in that area, there's, bring up the subject of raptors. Okay, what do these giant turbines do to hawks and falcons and eagles? And dig in a little bit, and you'll see that the top of the avian food chain it can be devastated quickly by these type of technologies. And I'm not here to rail against the renewables of wind and solar, because right now these are very powerful intermediate steps to where we need to get to. But what I want to point out is that there are some warts here as well, and the conversation needs to be widened. But just to give you a scope of the financial support that goes into those technologies, for solar power, $150 billion went into this, just a year or so ago. Wind, $100 billion, and that's only projected to continue to escalate, especially as governments get on board with addressing the climate change issue, which was, of course, the big deal about the Paris climate talks recently. So it's projected that there's going to be a whole lot more investment in these. Well, just imagine if you took a small fraction of that and put it toward the type of things that we're interested in becoming part of the conversation. Inside the Department of Energy, there is an agency called the Energy Information Administration, and what it does is it essentially keeps the data and statistics and makes projections on where are we going to be as far as energy. And this little graph here shows you that the little green part of those histograms is the renewable energy. It's essentially wind and solar that you see there, but it's just really tiny compared to the fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and look at what the projection of the curve is going out 25 years. All right? It basically says that in 2040, we still would only have 25% of our electricity being generated by renewables. And that is totally out of alignment with what would be required to address the climate change issue. Totally out of alignment. And these are our government statistics here. Again, here, if you look at it from a total global fuel, you see the same type of projection where not only are the renewables growing, but the growth continues on the fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, and so it's even a little lower here. The projection is that the renewables are only 15% of the total fuel, totally out of step with what the all the buzz is out there. Oh, the globe is going renewable. Well, that's really not what our own agencies are projecting here. So clearly, breakthroughs are needed. Let's talk about some, okay? So what about cold fusion? We've all heard that. What is that? Isn't that something that was totally dispelled, and it's just kind of a myth, and that it was a couple crazy guys that got on the covers of Time magazine, and but they were promptly drummed out of academia. Well, that's part of the story, but not all of the story. Those two researchers came up with their discovery 27 years ago, and it was an interesting process, an electrolysis project, that ended up producing excess heat. Well, it was a very outstanding discovery, but they were very promptly drummed down and drummed out of the U.S. academia because it was very threatening to mainstream physics. And basically, it was the whole thing was labeled junk science. So for anyone to refer to cold fusion or put even that term in a patent application, forget it. You were going to be turned out, turned away. You're a pariah, and no way. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is going to just put it in the round file. Not going to happen. The new name, the preferred name for the cold fusion field is called low energy nuclear reactions, LENR, and that's what I'm going to refer to going forward here. So what about it? What about LENR? Well, it turns out there's a company in Berkeley, very close by, called Breluin Energy Corporation. They have a couple different technologies that are based on their research and their technology. And essentially, these two technologies are using hydrogen gas in a type of reactor that has a core, a stainless steel core, has some nickel plated on it, and then they pulse, an electronic pulse into the process, and some amazing things happen. Actually, some very seemingly controlled nuclear reactions are happening, yet they are producing no harmful radiation, totally clean, and very high power density. So the amount of power density here is showing that they're getting 4 times as much thermal energy out from the process as the amount of electrical energy that's going into to create the pulses. Now, we would call that an over-unity effect, where the apparent output power is greater than the apparent input power. Doesn't mean energy is being created or any laws of physics are being defied. It just means that we're good at measuring certain things. We're not so good at measuring other things. But certainly empirically, it can be measured that these things are very robust in producing this excess thermal signature. And it's very exciting, and they're making good progress here. So I have high hopes for them. Another version of LENR, it was invented and propagated in part by one researcher here, Andrea Rossi. You can see him down there. The corporation he started, Leonardo Corporation, is in Florida. His technology he calls the ECAT, for energy catalyzer. He also uses a process that uses hydrogen in the form of a solid fuel. So it's incorporated with a couple other elements, specifically lithium and aluminum, to make a solid fuel pellet. And then it's put in the presence of powdered nickel. And when it's heated up, it also produces a good excess of thermal energy compared to the amount of electrical energy that was required to heat up the process. So in both cases, with Breluin from Berkeley and here with Leonardo with their ECAT, these have been verified. And there are patents that have been issued, and there's been good science, good credible teams of physicists who have looked at this and replicated the process. It is real. Cold fusion is real. Okay. Now, given that this type of technology is very good at producing thermal energy and specifically good for heating water, that has a lot of neat implications for us, because it's really water heating that consumes so much of the current energy, whether it's for your shower at home, heating your pot of coffee or your soup, or take it up to the scale of commercial power production, boiling water to produce steam to turn a turbine and produce electricity, which is really what most all industrial power plants are doing. They are boiling water to make steam. Well, how about instead of using a polluting fuel, we use a very clean process that's very high power density? Well, as far as what my projections combined with the conjecture of some of my colleagues, how far out are these things from hitting the market? Certainly the first part of the market that will be impacted by this is the industrial applications. Next would come the light commercial applications, and finally the consumer applications. And there'll be a timeline associated with that, but the consumer always wants to know, how come not me first? Why can't I have one at home? All right? Very practical reason why not. When you introduce a new technology, what you want to do is make sure it's in a safe environment that is supervised round the clock with experts who will know how to repair it if anything goes awry. And you want to be able to have it in an environment where it's running essentially continuously. So you have a really good chance to observe it, work through the bugs, understand its scalability, meaning can it be a small device, can it be a large device, and you have all of that going on in one location or a couple locations that can be easily monitored. Instead of having 1,000 of these in people's homes, all over the place, where if one accident happens, boom, it's shutdown time. And you just derailed a whole promising technology. Very practical reasons why you go to industry first. Okay? So I get the question all the time, well, Joel, how come I can't buy one at Walmart? Well, that's really the reason. Eventually you will, and maybe not at Walmart. Hopefully somewhere else. Maybe from a little community co-op that is dealing in advanced energy technologies for the local community. All right, some other promising technologies. This inventor here, Jim Murray, who lives in Oklahoma, he has an interesting circuit technology called the switched energy resonant power supply. And it's based on some of Tesla's work, and Jim is essentially a Tesla genius in a way. And he's had some replication of his circuitry and shows very promising results, almost 50 to 1 in its power amplification potential. And really neat things, possibilities, pretty outstanding there. Something else here, another researcher, inventor who lives in Southern California named David Pukta. He has a company called Proton Spin Technology, and he has this very unique plasma process. It's essentially forming this plasma inside a vessel of water, and it might be seawater, for instance. And what he's learned how to do is to induce certain frequencies into the water that causes an immense propagation of algae. And so you could see within minutes a clear beaker of seawater turn just soupy green, like pea soup, with algae. And then that algae can be used to make a biofuel. And then there's other derivatives that you could have from that, fertilizer, animal feed, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But he has learned how to trigger the metabolism of microbes. And part of the vast promise of a technology like that, which almost sounds like alchemy, is that you could potentially have microorganisms make so many valuable components, compounds, various elements. They're really, there would really be nothing called a rare earth element anymore, because we could have microorganisms produce them directly. And without biotechnology being involved, no gene manipulation or anything like that. It's just knowing how to specifically tickle organisms that already have the natural inherent capacity to manufacture everything they need. All right? So think about Star Trek replicators. Well, bacteria are like that. They are the universe's replicators. They just need to be tickled in the right way and coaxed to go, okay, I guess I need a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There it is. It's frequency-based. Frequency. Pretty powerful stuff. So, a little too far here. Go back. Okay. So what are the potential implications for our planet? All right. Think of some of the obvious good ones here. Clean up our atmosphere from everything that's polluting it from the combustion of fossil fuels. I'm not even talking about the CO2. I'm not even talking about methane. Let's get rid of the smog. All right? Let's get rid of the burning of coal that releases mercury into the atmosphere and that's been polluting our food chain and eventually bioaccumulates and causes problems in all organisms, especially the mammals and fish where it concentrates. Let's stop all that. Let's have really clean energy. All right? What about, drastically reducing the amount of carbon emissions, CO2 and methane that are released into the atmosphere right now and that are so implicated in the whole climate change discussion? What about using advanced energy technologies to grow our food in skyscrapers where you could have the amount of food that could feed thousands of people within 1 square block. There it goes right there. You got food to feed the world plus other planets. It's amazing. Round the clock food production, all organic, all the most nutritious food you could possibly imagine. Sorry, Monsanto. But that's what I see coming. All right, what about, now we have, let's say, a full fleet of vehicles that no longer are using fossil fuels. They're no longer polluting the road, the side of the roads, the medians and the berms and all that. Now we've got a very clean vehicle fleet, and that soil has been remediated. Now, how about if we plant fruit trees all throughout the medians, all along the sides of our roads, throughout the whole interstate system, and everyone adopts a tree. And you take care of it. You're the steward of it, and it's free. That fruit is free to whoever wants it. All right? Imagine the community effect that would have. Of people actually slowing down, pulling over, grabbing a pear, a handful of cherries, sharing them with the other families who are doing this. Picnics along the roadside. You see the type of possibilities that there are? It's amazing. These are just a few of them. Think about that, that big patch of plastic that's floating around in the Pacific Ocean somewhere, supposed to be the size of Texas or Australia, depending on whether you live in Texas or Australia. Okay. Imagine if we had vessels that essentially swept that stuff out of the ocean. They're powered by these advanced energy technologies, and they're just going round the clock, just scooping this stuff up, and they're using another advanced energy technology to basically take all that plastic and convert it into a type of clean fuel. All right? We could clean up the oceans. Amazing. So many things that we can do. And there's healing technologies that are going to be associated with these things as well. Frequency-based healing technologies. Incredible stuff. All right, so there's some of the good stuff. Now, what about some of the other stuff that we have to consider? All right, well, right now we got probably 200,000 of these convenience stores in the United States alone that are selling gasoline. So what do you do with the 10 employees at each one of those who are pumping gas as well as selling, big gulps and candy bars? All right, they're not going to be real happy if they don't have jobs, right? This is a very serious concern, and I'm very compassionate to the fact that the advent of new energy technologies in a large way will cause some dislocations in the workforce. We have to be eyes wide open on this. We don't want our brothers and sisters being impoverished because of the advent of something that is so beneficial to the planet. So we need to put aside some funds to re-educate people, reintegrate them into the economy, but this time working for some endeavors that are just beautiful and so packed with potential for the planet. Think about what happened when the advent of word processing came along, and all the typists, their jobs went away because now you had all the people in the office actually doing their own typing and all that on their own, on their own laptop. So what happened to most of those typists? Well, generally, corporations trained them to become the new system administrators and things like that. They became the leading experts on how these weird, computer devices worked. Higher value position now. Bump in pay, all these type of things. So people don't have to be left out. They don't have to be left behind. The retrofitting of all the vehicles of the planet. Imagine what that would look like. Oh, decades would be required to retrofit all the vehicles. Incredible business opportunities. All kinds of derivative businesses coming out of this that we can't even imagine. No one could have imagined, 2 decades ago, how many jobs, how many small businesses would have arisen out of what a couple of brilliant guys invented in their garage and called it a Mac, okay? Or called it a word processing program or whatever. I mean, all these things, and the same potential exists here. A new economic boom will come out of all of this. Okay, there are some obstacles as well. Has suppression happened of these technologies? Yes, absolutely. It has. All right? I personally know several inventors who've had some heavy-handed suppression, including one of them disappearing, where literally I could not find any trace of him after having had a long period of near daily communications. All right? So those type of things have happened. But it's time for that stuff to end. It's time for that stuff to end. And I feel in my heart that this change is happening because people are waking up to the fact that we can't go on like this anymore. That people who might have been consciously or unconsciously participating in the suppression efforts are realizing that this is not good. This just is not working for their own families and for their own sensibilities about the direction of a planet. So I see that we're ready for something else, all right? So I'm not going to go into the suppression thing because it's not the direction of our personal energy. We're looking toward a brilliant vision here. There are some other obstacles. Mainstream academic science tends to feel threatened by leapfrog technologies, very comfortable with incremental technologies, because that's the way corporate and government funding tends to work for university researchers. There's little increments, little improvements to existing technology. But the big leapfrog, the disruptive technology, highly threatening to careers and the persona of expert. All right? No one likes to all of a sudden be the expert of the obsolete. All right? So it's understandable. We all have egos. We all have something that supports our livelihood, materially supports our families. Very understandable. Fear is at the heart of it. And we all can identify what that means. When our own vested interests, especially when it impacts our family, when that arises in us, our response is to defend. So we get it. But through education and inviting participation and collaboration from very intelligent people, very intelligent researchers, I think we can, override that issue, address the concern, invite them to come on board. Let's do something great. Let's do it better and faster. How about that? Other obstacle is that the inventor community itself has some challenges. Many of these people are brilliant at what they do as technologists, as geniuses. But they may not have many of the other skills that are required to put together a high-performance team. And I can tell you for sure, a high-performance team is what's required to get something from the back of a napkin out into the public domain. I can tell you, as an inventor myself of several technologies, and technologies that have made it out and are successful in the marketplace, it takes a team. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes smart people who know what the heck they're doing. Inventors, when they get into the type of attitude that they know how each of those steps go, are fooling themselves. Fooling themselves, and it oftentimes become their own worst enemy, especially if they get gold fever around their ideas of what does a game-changing energy technology potentially mean in financial terms. I know what gold fever is, all right, and I've watched it. I've watched the distortion that it creates in people. And that goes on in the new energy scene as well. All right, so the inventors have some deficits here at times. A part of what new energy movement tries to do is we try to network the inventors with people of integrity who have different assets to bring to the party. And I don't just mean financial. I mean having legal skill, having business savvy, having the type of listening skills to help a oftentimes traumatized inventor even feel like he can relate to society again. A lot of soft social science is part of this. It's not just all the technical and business stuff, but it takes a team. That's my main point there. There's some other very practical things about this that have been obstacles. And what I have found in this over the last 15 years is that there's often such a barrage of claims of breakthrough technologies that it can be really hard to find the real solutions in what otherwise seems like a jungle of imposters, because so many of what are claimed are not what they are claimed here. Here's a good example. A colleague of mine who runs a news service on the energy scene, the new energy scene, he went to investigate a technology that was claimed to be an over-unity magnetic motor. And he was very, very convinced that this thing was real, not based on his own verification of the technology with sound instrumentation and data analysis and all of this, but based on what the inventor was telling him and videos the inventor was showing him and all kinds of stuff that sounded like, oh, this is just amazing, and the videos look amazing. Well, turns out that the videos, interestingly, that supposed inventor would not allow my colleague to come in and actually physically look at the device, because supposedly someone was out to get him, and if he let anyone in, it was going to be a really bad scene and all this. Well, my colleague had sent out a lot of these videos, and a few other savvy colleagues who actually had some expertise in video analysis said, very interesting. Did you note the fishing line? That nice monofilament, hard-to-see fishing line that goes from the motor and disappears off screen. It's total hoax. And my colleague got totally sucked in, took the bait. He had propagated this story widely through the new energy scene and beyond, and that discrediting hurt the whole movement, all right? Hurt the whole movement, and it brought a lot of criticism down on the colleague here. And some of it deserved, because he was not rigorous in verifying. On the internet, you put in something like water is fuel. See what happens. Thousands of hits. Thousands of hits. Oh my God. You can't possibly look through all these things, all right, without falling asleep, because you can't tell from a video whether something is real or not. You just can't. I don't even bother anymore. I hardly ever watch a video that someone sends to me. And I tell you, I've had a lot of videos sent to me over the years. You got to go see it. That's where it is. I'd rather receive a phone call from an inventor saying, hey, I got something amazing, and get a feel for the man or for the woman, and bring those softer senses into play, and then size up whether there's something about that individual that's coming through the conversation, even over the phone, that compels me to go and now meet face to face and then make the investigation. I'd much prefer that rather than a video. Well, the skeptics will all say, well, all these claims of free energy are totally bogus. And I don't use the term, and the new energy movement does not use the term free energy, because nothing's free. Clean, low cost, renewable, all of those things, yes. But to say free is really kind of disingenuous. Everything costs something. A device, you got actual materials there. Someone paid for something. It's not free. But full of incredible potential, absolutely. Well, those claims that all of them are bogus, well, that's disingenuous too, especially if you've done any digging, or you look at any of the information that we've been putting out for years. There's some fire under the smoke. But still, the vast majority of the inventor claims just don't hold up to good verification, scrutiny. And so how do we get through that? Oh, by the way, the cartoons, this is what someone like me sometimes does when he's going, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I'm not a very good cartoonist, but I try to have a lightness. Let's put it that way. So forgive me for the poor art. So, why are we having these problems here? Well, sometimes the inventor, when they're making their claims, they really are well-intended, and they really believe they have something good. But sometimes there's a misunderstanding of science, of real scientific principles here. And sometimes it's very fundamental. And I'll tell you, it's painful to go and investigate a technology and have to deliver the bad news that you missed that. And you see someone who's been working on something for perhaps 20 years, all of a sudden see their baby called ugly. That's not news that's fun to deliver. But it has to responsibly be done because you just saved someone more wasted time and energy and resources. But hopefully we can invite them to take what they have learned and collaborate with others on something that is real, okay? So also sometimes we see that there's the inappropriate use of testing technology. So that is something that you wouldn't think that would be the case, but it does happen. They're measuring the output from their inputs and outputs to the device with something that's really not the right equipment. It happens way too commonly. Misinterpretation of the testing data. Basically saying, hey, this means that this is a high power density new technology and blah, 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 when really it doesn't. So, that's something else. And then there are the frauds. And it is sad to say, but there definitely are those who would take advantage of others. And usually it's because those others haven't done their due diligence and pulled the sheepskin off, okay? But in each case, all right, all these where a claim has been made that turns out to really not be the case, the credibility of the whole new energy field is diminished. It's not just for that particular inventor, but it hurts the whole scene. It's one of the reasons why the academic community and the investment capital tend to shy away from this whole field, because when the new energy device and these claims pull up, the investment capital goes away. And why is that? It's because the investors are relying on technical advisors that largely are coming out of the academic community. They are the experts in conventional science and physics. All right? So if they're uncomfortable of putting their reputation on the line by endorsing a technology, it's much easier to say, don't waste your time because it's junk. All right? And that happens a lot. That happens a lot. So, we have to figure out a way to help make a richer stream of these technologies that have merit, rather than a huge stream of technologies that mostly are a waste of time. So when you see the academic community come in and they remain wary of these new energy claims, it's very understandable. They don't want to take the risk, especially if the technology itself, which might be very real, is dealing with principles that aren't well understood. All right? Even though the effects are real and measurable. Again, there's risk. And it takes some courage to say, I'm going to step out and just look at the data. I'm going to accept the data. Even when I measure it and I get this compelling data, I'm going to stand by it. Rather than go, no, all the textbooks say this is impossible. And you take the easy way out and you go, I'm just not going to look at it anymore because I'm going to get laughed at by my colleagues. Okay, yeah. Remember Kimberly talking about courage? This is where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so how do we turn this scene around? Well, there's some real practical ways to do it. And I'm all about the practical. I am a scientist, yes, but my degree is in applied science, so I'm interested in stuff that works. I don't care about the theoretical stuff. Leave that to the smart people. I just care, does this work? Does it have a social benefit? Can it help us clean up the planet? So here's something very practical that every technology should go through, and it's part of good business practices as well, and that's establishing rigorous testing protocols for breakthrough energy technology claims. All right, then what happens, you got those protocols, we open source those to the whole new energy community. All right, so everyone's dealing with the same recipe book, same playbook. All right, and this is just very fundamental. And this is done in other areas of science and technology, but it's been really omitted so far from the new energy scene. So when I've shopped this around, and by the way, I've been talking about this, like Foster, you would know this. You've heard me talking about this for almost 3 years. You know, Catherine Austin Fitz, Jeane Manning, others, they've heard me, you know, talking about this idea. You know, having these rigorous test protocols, all right? Well, some people say, hey, this sounds like a great idea, Joel. Sounds like a lot of work, Joel. Doesn't sound very exciting. Who's going to do this? Well, probably not someone who's just going to lounge around. You know, it's going to be real work, all right? And some people who have the skills to do it are going to be the ones who would be recruited to do this. So, like with kind of standard processes in science and business, you form a committee to do this. In this case, it would be well-qualified, credentialed people from the science and engineering communities who would write these procedures. Now, when I've contacted such professionals and have put it out there like, hey, if we can do this, if we can get the support to do this, would you serve on such a committee? All right? And the feedback has been pretty consistent. It says, well, it sounds great. I agree with all this, would like to help. However, I don't have the time to volunteer. I understand that. I've been on voluntary protocol development committees in the water treatment field, where that's how I feed my family currently. It has nothing to do with the new energy field. Everyone at the New Energy Movement is essentially an unpaid volunteer. We do this because we believe it's what it's our calling to do. But I work in the water treatment field. And so I've served on protocol development committees, both for the state of New Jersey and for the country of Canada. And I know what it means to put in the time and dig in, and you know, it's kind of a lot of nitty-gritty on it, but it's important. It's the only way you really get you know, really good vetting techniques captured and disseminated, so that ends up benefiting the community, both the consumer and the investment community for any type of technology. Well, we can't reasonably expect everyone to be volunteers, especially if we want it to have this happen fast. Being able to pay people to do this valuable work would change that, and that's just very practical. Everyone wants to be paid for their work, and I support that. They should be. The scope of work itself basically would be putting together a set of protocols that would account for various type of energetic inputs and outputs, and those would be, you know, electrical and magnetic and thermal, mechanical, chemical, and nuclear. Those basically, you know, resolve all the different potentially measurable inputs and outputs. And then that would all be compiled into a document that could be easily referenced. It's essentially the cookbook that everyone has at the inventor's lab bench. Very, very convenient, very comprehensive. And then, very importantly, there also would be a special appendix in this. And what it would be a compilation of the findings of various people who have been out there vetting these type of technologies around the world. And I have a stable of colleagues who have been doing this for years, going around and investigating these claims. And because the vast majority of what they've investigated has been junk, they've learned what the red flags were. Very practical, very, very practical and very valuable addition to any document like this. What are the common errors? All right? If an inventor sees that, and he's like, oh, I'm doing that. I'm doing one of those errors. Well, gosh, think about what, you just did him an enormous favor, because now he doesn't waste his time doing something that's going to be fruitless. All right? So this would be a really unique thing to put into the protocols, and highly, highly valuable. And it builds on the experiences of these people who've been going around tirelessly trying to uncover the diamonds in the rough out there. Then there'd be a coordinator of this whole program who oversees that committee, and when the thing's finally done, they essentially coordinate the release of it. So it goes out through all these channels, And so the inventor becomes aware of it, all that community, the investment community, the science community, everybody's got the same playbook. And those inventors who end up using that protocol to establish the performance claims of their own technology, they enhance their own credibility, all right? And that means that they're going to bring the resources from the investment community because they've established credibility, all right? Because again, the protocols would be written by these very credentialed experts in the energy field. So the vetting agents who then come to see if the claims that the inventor have made are valid, they're going to be using the exact same protocols that the inventor used in establishing his claim. It's very consistent. It's basically just saying like, okay, you baked a cake with those ingredients and it tasted like chocolate. I'm going to use the same ingredients, see if I get the same dessert, okay? Very, very simple. And this is how it works in industry already. It certainly works in the water industry that I'm in. And, you know, so there's nothing outstanding about this. It's just this is a discipline that yet needs to be applied, all right? But when they go through this and they get verified, boy, that is the stamp of gold, all right? So the inventors should really, really welcome this if they're real. So as the investment community becomes aware of these, they will only financially support those technologies where those protocols have been applied, because they know that that's going to be a wise use of their money. All right, so it's essentially as a seal of approval that says this is a safe investment. So to boil it all down to the real expected outcomes is we now take what has been a vast stream, a wide stream of junk technology now gets concentrated and propagated into a very concentrated stream of technologies of merit. And that ends up saving an enormous amount of time and money and personal energy that otherwise is squandered when you're trying to figure out whether, you know, the piece of junk is real or not. So this would, the end result is a much faster entry of the technologies of merit into the public domain to do all of those things that we know is important to do with these type of incredible technologies. Is there a cost attached to doing this? Yes, there is. I'm projecting it's fairly minimal, you know, $50,000 to $100,000, which is minimal considering the leverage of something like this. And an organization like New Energy Movement could spearhead this, but there could be many others. And I would invite anyone who would want to take this on, go with it, run with it. It's a good idea. We've gotten the feedback. We have people who are willing to serve on the committees. But, you know, we will do this work if the support comes to do that. But again, others are welcome to take it on as well. I wanted to make you aware of much of the resource that New Energy Movement provides to the public is in the form of a book called Breakthrough Power. And Jeane Manning, who you see here, is my co-author of this book. And Jeane is here and she's an amazing, amazing woman. She has been, for 30 years plus, has been investigating this whole field of new energy, writing about it, lecturing about it worldwide. Over those 30 plus years, she has interviewed more inventors in the new energy scene than anyone by far. Jeane legitimately is the real expert. She's been a primary mentor to me, and she's just a beloved colleague. So I hope you get to meet Jeane. She'll be selling books out there on the side, and I hope you pick it up. I am very proud to announce that New Energy Movement now has a new executive director as of today. Her name is Susan Kornacki. Susan, are you here? There she is, way in the back. Susan has some skills as a conscious leader, conscious leadership expert, and emotional intelligence expert. She's provided consultation to a lot of major organizations for years on those topics. She's a deep listener. She has experience in the new energy field as well. She's really going to be able to direct those skills toward helping us in our efforts to dramatically increase our public outreach as far as educating about this whole thing that I've been talking to you about, and also our inventor advocacy efforts. And I just know that Susan's going to be an amazing ambassador for the new